I didn't plan on standing there, frozen in the dim light of the hotel lobby, watching her tie her scarf just so. The corners of her mouth tugged into a hint of something unreadable. But that was me, as usual, trapped by the way she moved through a room, confident and impossible to ignore, like she knew she had the power to bend time around her. I was stacking keys behind the front desk, trying to pretend I hadn't noticed the way her heels clicked against the marble when she leaned across the counter with a smile that made my stomach clench. She smelled faintly of vanilla and rain, a mix that made me want to breathe in the air she had touched. "You're new," she said, tilting her head slightly. Not a question, not an introduction, just a statement, like she already knew the answer and didn't care whether I did. I cleared my throat, fumbling with the pen between my fingers. "Yeah, just started last week." My voice sounded smaller than it had any right to. She laughed softly, not loud enough to echo, but just enough to make me notice the way her hand brushed against the counter, as if brushing me aside was deliberate, casual, teasing. There was a pause, the kind that stretches too long, where words hover in the air and the world seems to shrink. She tilted her head, eyebrows raised just slightly, and I could swear she was measuring me against some invisible standard. I wanted to look away, but instead I found myself leaning a fraction closer. "You make it quiet here," she said, almost whispering. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had been heard too little, but also the authority of someone who knew she didn't have to ask for attention. I tried to reply with something mundane. I like quiet," but my mouth wouldn't obey. My thoughts were tangled up in the flicker of her eyes and the way her scarf fell just right across her shoulder. She reached out to adjust a slightly crooked lamp behind the desk. Her fingers grazed mine for a second, just a brush, nothing more, and it sent a shock that felt far bigger than it should. I wanted to say something clever, maybe make her laugh, but I swallowed it instead. The world resumed around us, with the soft hum of the heater and the faint squeak of the elevator, but something between us had shifted. I couldn't name it, but I knew it would stay lodged in my chest. She leaned back slightly, a half-smile playing on her lips, and that was when it happened. She whispered, almost casually, "You can't resist me." I blinked. My heart slammed against my ribs like it had a mind of its own. I wanted to argue, to claim I could, but the truth caught in my throat. I couldn't. I didn't even want to. And the way she said it, like it wasn't a threat, like it was a promise, made me aware of every small detail. The curve of her neck, the tilt of her head, the way the light hit her cheek just right. I spent the rest of my shift pretending nothing had happened, stacking keys and checking guests in and out, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. About that moment. About the quiet, taut electricity that stretched between us like a thread ready to snap. Even now, hours later, I can't shake the memory. She's there, leaning against the counter, smiling that impossible smile, and I know, somehow, that this is only the beginning. The next time I saw her, it was in the small storage room behind the hotel lobby, boxes of towels stacked haphazardly, the fluorescent light flickering above us like it couldn't decide whether to stay awake. She was crouched down, trying to reach a box that had slipped to the floor, her blazer sliding down her shoulders in a way that seemed accidental but deliberate all at once. "Here, I've got it," I said, stepping closer. My hands wrapped around the box, lifting it carefully so she didn't have to strain. She straightened up, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and for a moment, I caught a flicker of something, hesitation, maybe, or the barest hint of relief. "Thanks," she murmured, and I noticed the faint crease between her brows, like she was carrying something heavier than the box. Her eyes avoided mine for a second too long before she forced a smile. We moved through the room together in silence, shifting boxes from one shelf to another. I watched her hands, long and deliberate, the way her fingers brushed against the fabric of her blazer when she adjusted it, the subtle tremor in her grip when she carried the heavier boxes. She wasn't clumsy, but she wasn't invincible either, and seeing that, seeing her human in a way she didn't let anyone else see, made my chest tighten. At one point, she laughed softly at something I muttered, a joke half-formed, more nervous than funny, and it hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. It was warm, layered, like the sound carried fragments of things she didn't say. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I didn't. I just let her laugh fill the small room, feeling the quiet pull of something forbidden, something I shouldn't be caught in but couldn't resist. She paused, adjusting a box on a higher shelf, and I noticed the shadows under her eyes. Not enough to look tired, but enough that I realized she was running on some invisible reserve of energy. It made her seem vulnerable, almost fragile, and yet the air around her remained charged with that quiet, guarded authority. "You always do this," she said suddenly, not looking at me, her voice soft but edged with something I couldn't name. "Step in when I don't ask for help." "I guess I notice things," I said, not knowing why I said it, and immediately regretted how small and earnest it sounded. She gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, and turned away, scanning the shelves like she had work to do, but no interest in leaving me behind entirely. There was a pause. I could feel the space between us stretching, a thread of tension, subtle and electric, tying us to this moment. I wanted to say something, to bridge it, but I didn't. I didn't want to break whatever fragile balance existed here. Finally, she leaned against a shelf, just a little too close, and rested her hand on the edge near mine. It wasn't accidental, not really, but she made it seem casual, like it was nothing. I caught the warmth of her skin through the thin glove of the box, and it was enough to make my fingers tighten without meaning to. Her eyes flicked up to mine for a heartbeat, and in that instant, I saw her, not the confident, untouchable woman everyone else knew, but someone real, someone human, someone dangerously magnetic. She stepped back then, just a fraction, and smiled that almost hidden smile. "Careful," she said, her voice low, teasing, but there was something underneath it, a tremor, a hesitation, a thread of something unspoken. I stayed frozen for a second after she walked away, replaying that touch, that glance, the quiet pull of her energy that I knew I shouldn't follow but already was. It was past midnight when I found myself walking her back to her hotel room. The lobby was empty, the rain outside tapping against the glass in a slow, relentless rhythm, like it was trying to push us closer without actually touching us. She carried a folder clutched to her chest, shoulders hunched, hair damp at the ends. "You shouldn't be walking alone this late," I said, stepping alongside her. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I'm not," she replied, and for a heartbeat, I caught her smirk, the one that held just enough playfulness to mask something deeper. She glanced at me quickly, like testing a line I wasn't supposed to cross. The elevator ride was quiet except for the soft hum of the motor. We pressed the button for her floor and both looked down, letting the silence stretch, heavy and almost unbearable. My hand itched to brush against hers as we stood side by side, but I didn't move. I didn't dare. She shifted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, and I noticed how tired she looked, the curve of her jaw slightly tense, the faint shadow under her eyes. "Long day?" I asked, though I knew it was more than that. "Long week," she admitted softly, almost a whisper, her gaze slipping to the floor. She didn't look at me, but her shoulder nudged mine by accident. Or maybe not. That small contact, a fraction of a second, was enough to send a wave of tension through me. The elevator dinged, and just as she was about to step out, her phone vibrated. She glanced down at the screen, hesitated, and then sighed. "It's someone I probably shouldn't talk to right now," she muttered, slipping the phone back into her bag. I didn't ask who. I didn't want to know. The hallway outside was dimly lit, the carpet muffling our steps. We walked in silence for a moment, and then, suddenly, she stopped and turned to face me. "I should probably," she trailed off, the words unspoken but hanging thick in the air. Her eyes searched mine, sharp and searching, daring me to say something I shouldn't. I swallowed, feeling the pull of everything unsaid. My heart was thudding against my ribs, my fingers curling into fists at my sides, trying to contain the urge to step closer. I could almost taste the hesitation in her, the weight of restraint she carried like armor. And I didn't want to push. Not yet. Not until she decided. We stood there, barely a foot apart, the storm outside echoing the tight coil of tension between us. Her lips parted slightly, a half breath, a half smile, and I could feel the pull of her energy like a gravity I couldn't resist. Then a knock at her door shattered the moment. She jumped, startled, and quickly straightened, pulling her bag tighter against her body. I stepped back automatically, chastising myself for letting a heartbeat of closeness feel like a confession. "Good night," she said, voice carefully neutral, masking the tremor I thought I'd seen in her. Her hand lingered on the doorknob for a second too long, and I noticed it. The brief hesitation, the flicker of something unspoken, something that made the air between us electric. I watched her disappear inside, the door closing with a soft click. My fingers itched to reach out, to stop it, to say anything, but I didn't. I was left standing there, the sound of rain filling the hallway, replaying that heartbeat of near action over and over in my mind. The conference room was empty except for us, the blinds drawn halfway, so the city lights bled in thin lines across the carpet. I had thought I'd come in to grab some extra files, but she was already there, perched on the edge of the long table, arms crossed, eyes tracing the skyline as if looking for something she couldn't name. I froze for a second, unsure whether to announce myself or just disappear. She didn't notice me at first, lost in her own quiet storm. When she finally did, her eyes flicked up, sharp but tired, and held me there longer than usual. I felt the weight of it, not accusation, not exactly, but something heavy, unsayable. "You ever wonder," she started, her voice low, hesitant, as though speaking it aloud might break her, "what we're even doing here?" I swallowed, unsure if she meant the project, the hotel, or us. I wanted to laugh, make a joke, deflect, but something in her tone stopped me. I only nodded, though it felt inadequate. She let out a breath that sounded too long, too human, and for a moment I noticed everything. The faint tremor in her fingers as she traced the edge of the table, the way her shoulders slumped just slightly, like she was carrying something she couldn't set down. I wanted to reach out, to steady her, but I couldn't move. I couldn't risk it. "I don't know," she continued, voice barely above a whisper. I thought I knew. I thought I had all the answers, and now I don't even recognize myself." Her gaze shifted to me, and for the first time, it wasn't teasing, not playful, not distant. It was raw, unguarded, vulnerable. I wanted to speak, to say something that would fix it, anything. But the right words didn't exist. All I could do was take a step closer, careful not to crowd her, careful not to break the fragile honesty spilling into the room. She leaned back slightly, eyes falling to the table, and I could feel her breath catch, like she was holding herself together by the thinnest thread. Silence stretched between us, thick, loaded, impossible to ignore. The air seemed to pulse with unspoken things. Fear, confusion, regret, something dangerous I didn't have the right to name. "I can't," she said finally, cutting the silence, voice trembling. "I can't do this and pretend it's normal. Not anymore." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. I wanted to argue, to claim it was normal, that nothing had changed. But the truth was undeniable. We both felt it. The tension that had been simmering quietly had ignited into something larger, something terrifying in its clarity. We didn't touch. We didn't even look directly at each other for more than a heartbeat after that. Yet somehow, the silence became louder than any word could be, louder than any near confession, louder than the small brushes of fingers or shared glances that had haunted me all week. Finally, she stood, shoulders stiff, and gathered her papers. Her voice was low, almost broken. "I'm not sure I want to know where this goes, but I can't pretend anymore that I don't feel it." And then she left, leaving me staring at the empty conference room, the faint hum of the city below filling the hollow ache she had left behind. I sank into the chair she'd vacated, trying to steady my hands. I kept replaying her words, her glance, her voice. I couldn't stop thinking about the thread she had thrown into the air, fragile, electric, impossible to ignore, and the devastating truth I couldn't fix. I had already felt it too. The tension here is intentionally raw, existential, and emotionally charged, with the slow burn intimacy intensifying without crossing into romance. I didn't expect to see her in the lounge that evening. The hotel was nearly empty, the scent of brewed coffee lingering in the air, warm and slightly bitter. She was sitting in the corner, a notebook open on her lap, and her fingers tracing lines on the page without writing anything. The quiet hum of the espresso machine filled the space between us, making it impossible to ignore the tension that had been simmering all week. I approached cautiously. "Hey, mind if I sit?" She looked up, startled for just a second, then nodded. "Sure." Her voice was softer than usual, almost fragile. I slid into the chair across from her, noticing the tremor in her hands as she closed the notebook. "I didn't know you wrote," I said, trying to keep my tone light, though I could feel my chest tightening. She shook her head, eyes unfocused. "Not really, just thoughts," she muttered. She paused, as if weighing whether to continue. Then she said it, quietly, like revealing a secret too heavy to hold. "I lost someone once. Someone I thought I could never replace." I blinked, caught off guard. Her usual confidence, the carefully controlled poise she wore like armor, seemed to crack just enough for me to see something vulnerable, something human. I wanted to reach across the table, to say something comforting, but I held back. Instead, I nodded, letting the silence acknowledge her without interrupting it. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. "It's been years," she continued, voice barely above a whisper, "and yet some days it feels like yesterday." She glanced at me, and for the first time, I saw hesitation in her eyes. Not a challenge this time, but uncertainty, a question she couldn't fully voice. I wanted to say something, anything, but I remembered a photo I had noticed in the office months ago, a woman laughing, framed on her desk. I mentioned it gently. "She looks like someone I met once. You seemed close." Her eyes widened slightly, not in alarm, but recognition. The tension in her shoulders softened imperceptibly. She exhaled slowly. "Yeah, that's her. My sister. I haven't talked about her in a long time." The words were small, hesitant, but they carried weight. We didn't speak for a moment. I just watched her, noticing the faint crease in her brow, the almost imperceptible slump in her posture, the way her hands gripped the cup like it could anchor her. It was human, honest, shaking, but not collapsing. "I guess," she said finally, voice low. "I just forget sometimes that grief doesn't have a timetable, that it doesn't stop because life goes on." I nodded, unsure how to respond. I wanted to reassure her, to bridge the space between us, but I didn't. Instead, I let her words settle, their weight filling the quiet lounge like a secret I wasn't meant to touch, but couldn't stop noticing. She looked up at me then, a faint, almost apologetic smile brushing her lips. "Thanks for noticing," she said softly. It wasn't gratitude exactly, more an acknowledgement that someone had finally seen her, truly seen her, without judgment. I realized in that moment that everything had shifted. Not dramatically, not with fireworks or shouting, but subtly, seismic in its quietness. A fragile thread had been tugged, and I felt it in my chest. The awareness that the person I'd been drawn to all along was more complicated, more tender, more broken than I had imagined. And yet, despite that fragility, I found myself wanting to follow that thread, wherever it led. It was late again, the lobby mostly dark except for the soft glow of the desk lamp. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, knees tucked slightly under her, scrolling through her phone with a careful detachment that I recognized instantly. I didn't sit immediately. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, listening to the faint click of her fingers against the screen. She glanced up, eyes meeting mine. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, there was no teasing in her gaze, no challenge, just recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that whatever had been simmering between us had grown too loud to ignore. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly, almost apologetically, though I could tell she wasn't really apologizing. "I wanted to," I said. My voice was low, careful. I could see the flicker in her eyes, that small hesitation, the way she weighed whether to step closer or retreat. We didn't talk much after that. There was no confession, no dramatic turning point. Just a slow exhale of everything we'd been holding back, all the tension, the questions, the unsaid words. We moved naturally toward the couch. I sat beside her, careful to leave space, but the quiet made the distance feel smaller than it actually was. She shifted slightly, brushing her hand against mine. A fleeting contact, almost accidental, but I didn't pull away. Neither did she. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden, it was enough. Enough to let us know that we were both here, aware of each other, and that the careful balance we'd been holding had changed. We settled into the quiet together. No words, just the rhythm of shared breathing, the faint sound of the city outside, the lamp casting soft shadows across her face. I noticed the small details I hadn't before. The curve of her jaw, the way her hair caught the light, the slight tension in her shoulders that was slowly easing. Her hand moved a little closer, resting near mine, fingertips grazing. I hesitated, then let my fingers brush hers, holding the contact longer this time. She didn't pull back. That simple touch said more than any words could. We were here, fully present, without forcing anything. For a moment, I thought of how long we'd been circling this. All the near misses, the stolen glances, the quiet storms and sudden revelations. And yet, none of that mattered now. We were simply here, together, grounded in a connection that had been earned, piece by piece, moment by moment. She leaned back slightly, letting the faint tension in her shoulders soften completely. I could feel the subtle warmth of her hand, the trust and restraint she carried, and I knew she trusted me to stay, not to rush, not to complicate what we had finally acknowledged in silence. We sat there for what felt like hours, just breathing in the quiet. No declarations, no promises, only presence, only understanding, only the mutual decision to allow ourselves this space, together, without words, without fanfare. Finally, she leaned her forehead briefly against my temple. A tiny gesture, almost imperceptible, but it carried everything we hadn't said. And in that soft, quiet collapse into each other, I felt a sense of finality. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. We didn't need anything else. The moment was ours, and it was enough. I still remember that night clearly, though it feels like a lifetime ago. The hotel lobby, the quiet glow of the desk lamp, the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. It all seems smaller now, like a scene carefully compressed in memory. Yet the way she leaned her forehead against mine, the gentle brush of our fingers, is something I carry with me every day. I've changed since then, though it's subtle. I notice things more. The small hesitations in people, the pauses that carry unspoken weight, the tiny gestures that reveal more than words ever could. I see her now through a lens I didn't have before. Her confidence isn't just bravado. It's layered with vulnerability and strength, and her laughter, once a tease, now echoes with trust. She's changed too, I think. I see it in the way she lets herself pause, lets someone in without armor, without testing every step. The guarded energy she carried so tightly has softened, not disappeared, but shifted into something richer, more human. Something that makes connection inevitable rather than forced. We didn't need declarations. We didn't need dramatics. Love didn't arrive like a storm or a movie scene. It arrived quietly, in presence, in attention, in the patience of waiting and watching and understanding. And in that quiet, I learned something I hadn't known before. The most profound moments aren't always the ones that shout the loudest. Sometimes they whisper. I remember the small things, the way her hand found mine when it could have pulled away, the way her eyes met mine and lingered, the subtle, unspoken acknowledgement that we had crossed an invisible line together and chosen to stay. Those tiny gestures became our language, far more powerful than any words. Looking back, I realized that what we built wasn't about passion alone. It was about respect, restraint, trust, and the courage to feel something dangerous and beautiful at the same time. And maybe that's what love is at its most honest, messy, human, fragile, and inevitable all at once. Even now, when I replay those nights in my mind, there's no grand crescendo, no fireworks, only the soft pulse of connection that lingers, quiet but undeniable. And I smile, because I know that we found something that isn't flashy, but it's ours. Something that will stay with me, quietly, in every small gesture and glance, every shared silence. Every moment that could have gone wrong but didn't. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?